Did you know that America was named after a map maker? Yes, you heard it right. The name America sprung from Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian mapmaker who first suggested that the Americas were distinct landmasses, separate from Asia. So the land of the free and home of the brave owes its name to an Italian cartographer. But let's delve deeper into the making of this great nation. The story of America starts with the adventurous explorers from Europe who ventured into the unknown. In the late 15th century, an Italian sailor named Christopher Columbus, sponsored by the Spanish monarchs, set sail across the Atlantic. He was searching for a new route to Asia, but what he found was something far more significant. In 1492, Columbus stumbled upon a land that was unfamiliar to him, a land that would later be known as the Americas. Little did he know his discovery would change the course of history forever. Columbus's journey marked the beginning of a large-scale exploration and colonization of the New World by Europeans. Over the next few centuries, explorers and settlers from England, France, Spain, and other European nations flocked to these newfound lands, drawn by the promise of wealth, religious freedom, and a fresh start. But as Europeans began to settle, a clash of cultures ensued. The indigenous people, who had been living in the Americas for thousands of years, found their lives drastically changed by these newcomers. Diseases brought by the Europeans, to which the indigenous people had no immunity, decimated their populations. Their lands were seized, their cultures often misunderstood or disregarded. Yet, amid the turmoil, there were also moments of exchange and adaptation. Europeans learned new farming techniques from the Native Americans, while the indigenous people adopted some European goods and ideas. These interactions, both tragic and transformative, played a crucial role in the shaping of the New World. As the European colonies grew, they developed distinct identities, driven by their unique geographical locations, economic systems, and cultural practices. These colonies would eventually become the building blocks of a new nation, laying the foundation for what we now know as the United States of America. And so, the discovery of the New World by Christopher Columbus set off a chain of events that would forever alter the world. A new chapter in human history was being written, one that was filled with conquest, conflict, and change. This was just the beginning of a series of events that would eventually shape the United States of America. From exploration to colonization, the Europeans established their presence in the New World, leading to the birth of the 13 colonies. The British, Dutch, and French were the main colonizers, each bringing their unique cultural and political influences to the shores of America. The 13 colonies, named for their founding British monarchs and the locations they occupied, were a patchwork quilt of diverse peoples, cultures, and economies. From the bustling, trade-focused cities of the north to the rural, agriculture-driven south, colonial life was as varied as the people who lived it. But life in the colonies wasn't all about prosperity and progress. There were struggles and hardships too. The colonists had to grapple with harsh winters, disease, and occasional conflicts with Native Americans. But perhaps the greatest challenge they faced was living under the rule of a distant monarchy. As the colonies grew, so did their economic strength. However, the British Crown, in an attempt to recoup the costs of colonial defense and administration, began to impose a series of taxes on the colonies. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. These were not just taxes, they were a direct challenge to the autonomy and prosperity of the colonies. The colonists' response was a rallying cry that echoed across the Atlantic: "No taxation without representation." This slogan became the fuel for the fire of revolution, sparking a series of protests and acts of defiance that would eventually lead to outright war. The Revolutionary War, which began in 1775, was a brutal and bloody conflict. But it was also a war of ideas, a struggle for freedom and self-determination. The colonists, despite being outgunned and outnumbered, were driven by a powerful idea: the idea of a nation governed by its people, not by a distant king. The Revolutionary War was a turning point, not just for the colonies, but for the concept of democracy around the world. It was a war that would change the course of history, setting the stage for the birth of a new nation, the United States of America. With the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, a new nation was born. This momentous occasion marked a pivotal turning point in the annals of history. The Declaration of Independence wasn't just a piece of parchment, it was a promise, a commitment to liberty and self-governance. In the heart of a fierce revolutionary war, the 13 colonies united under a single banner, declaring themselves free from the shackles of British rule. This war was more than a struggle for territory. It was a battle of ideas, a clash between the old world's monarchy and the new world's democracy. As the smoke of battle cleared, the young nation found itself in a unique position. It was a land of vast potential, but also a land of great uncertainty. The fight for freedom had been won, but the question remained: how would this new nation govern itself? Enter the United States Constitution. Crafted in 1787, this groundbreaking document would serve as the nation's blueprint, outlining the structure of the government and establishing the rights and freedoms of its citizens. It was a daring experiment in self-governance, a beacon of hope in an era of monarchies and empires. The Constitution was not without its critics, however. Debates raged over the balance of power between the federal government and the states. The question of slavery also loomed large, casting a long shadow over the fledgling nation. But through all the debates and disagreements, the Constitution endured, its principles guiding the nation through its early years. The birth of the United States was a moment of triumph, but it was also a moment of tremendous challenge. The nation had to navigate uncharted waters to establish a new form of government and to reconcile its lofty ideals with the harsh realities of the time. Through the trials and tribulations, the United States emerged not as a perfect union but as a work in progress, a nation continually striving to live up to its founding principles. The United States of America was now a reality, but it had many challenges ahead. The United States, a young nation, was soon to face one of its biggest tests: civil war. Born out of a complex web of economic, political, and social tensions, the Civil War was a monumental event in the nation's history. At the heart of these tensions was the issue of slavery. The southern states, where agricultural economy was heavily dependent on slave labor, and the northern states, largely industrial and increasingly anti-slavery, found themselves on a collision course. By the early 1860s, the divide had grown so wide that 11 southern states seceded from the Union, sparking the Civil War. The war was brutal and bloody, claiming more American lives than any other war before or since. It was during this time of turmoil that President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a historic document that declared slaves in Confederate-held territory to be free. This not only changed the course of the war, but also the course of American history. The end of the war in 1865 marked the beginning of the Reconstruction era. This was a period of rebuilding, but also of deep societal change. The 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery throughout the nation, was ratified. The 14th and 15th Amendments followed, granting equal protection under the law and voting rights to all male citizens, regardless of race. However, Reconstruction was not without its challenges. The South's economy was in ruins, racial tensions were high, and the process of integrating former slaves into society was fraught with difficulty. Despite these hurdles, the period was a significant step towards the realization of America's founding ideals. The Civil War left deep scars, but it also led to the abolition of slavery and a reshaped nation. It was a time of great upheaval, but out of the ashes rose a country more unified and dedicated to the principles of liberty and equality for all. From the Roaring Twenties to the Great Depression, from World War II to the Civil Rights Movement, the 20th century was a time of great change for America. The Roaring Twenties saw an economic boom, a cultural explosion, and the rise of jazz. The flapper era was in full swing and prohibition became the law of the land, giving rise to speakeasies and bootleggers. But the party couldn't last forever, and the stock market crash of 1929 ushered in the Great Depression, a period of economic hardship that gripped the nation until the late 30s. Then came World War II. America emerged from the war as a global superpower, its economy revitalized by the demands of the wartime industry. It was a time of change, a time of growth, but also a time of tension as the Cold War set in and the arms race began. The civil rights movement of the 1960s brought social change, challenging racial segregation and discrimination. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks became symbols of a fight for equality that continues to this day. As we moved into the latter part of the century, we saw the rise of the digital revolution. The creation of the internet, the proliferation of personal computers, and the birth of the smartphone changed our lives in ways we could have never imagined. Technology reshaped our economy, our society, and our daily routines. And that brings us to the America we know today, a land of diverse cultures and ideas, always evolving and pushing boundaries.